Welcome to the 280th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with New York Times bestselling author Susan Wiggs. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Susan Wiggs, author of the brand new novel, The Lost and Found Bookshop. Susan's novels have appeared in the number one spot on the New York Times Bestseller List and have captured readers' hearts around the globe with translations into more than 20 languages and 30 countries. Her previous novels have included The Apple Orchard, The Oysterville Sewing Circle, Return to Willow Lake, and many others. Susan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to come and talk about books and writing all the time.
Great. Well, if someone listening hasn't heard about your new novel, The Lost and Found Bookshop, how would you describe it?
This one is a book that occupied my entire life for a year. It is a very personal novel. The main character, Natalie, she's purposely built a life of emotional and financial security. She wanted to protect herself from the way that she was raised in what she viewed as a very unstable childhood, living in a garret apartment above a rickety old bookshop in old San Francisco. And so she's always been on a quest for stability. And pretty much on page one, her world gets turned upside down by this very overwhelming tragedy and situation. And she finds herself taking over the bookstore that she never expected to have, in addition to being the caregiver for her elderly and much beloved but very needy grandfather at the same time. So she has a triple whammy. It's one of those stories that illustrates that things don't happen to us one at a time. We don't get to get through one crisis and move on to the next. Sometimes, there's an entire storm of things. So it's the unraveling of a life and the remaking of a life. And it's a very tender novel, whereas my previous novel, The Oysterville Sewing Circle, was rather angry. It involved domestic abuse and workplace abuse and things like that. This one is much more intimate and quite personal to me as well. I'm the caregiver for my elderly mom, who's 89. So yeah, there's my long-winded answer. I'm so excited for it to come out because one of the things my publisher did for this book is they produced an early copy edition and sent it to many, many independent booksellers all around the country for feedback. And I'm so excited because based on the feedback that came back, it hits the right notes for people who love books and love bookstores. They love book groups. And so I'm really excited to get this into the hands of readers.
And so do you remember the original idea that led you to write The Lost and Found Bookshop?
Yes, and it has nothing to do with anything I just told you. I was reading, like all writers, I'm just endlessly curious about minutia that most people would overlook. And I happened to be reading something in either National Geographic or Smithsonian magazine about the Spanish-American War, which very few of us know much about, myself included. And I read a little bit that said that some of the soldiers in that war were deployed from San Francisco to the Philippines, which was a Spanish possession in 1899. And so before they were deployed, they were stationed in San Francisco. And when they had to leave something of value behind, they didn't necessarily have a home or anybody to leave it with, or a bank deposit box or anything. And so they would sometimes hide things in the walls of their favorite saloons. And I was very intrigued by that idea. I'm thinking, if I'm going away and I don't know when I'll be back or if I'll ever be back, but I have something I want to leave behind or something of value, I kind of, I started riffing on that idea, and I came up with this whole incredibly dramatic but totally unworkable historical novel. But then I know, it was sort of like going down a rabbit hole. One thing led to another, and I thought, okay, well, what would the building be? It would be a building in old San Francisco, but it would have to be a building that survived the 1906 earthquake and fire. And I learned that about 25% of the buildings did survive. And so then I invented my own building. So it actually started with the building. And then I thought, who would the occupants be? What would be in there? And so then we fast forward, and this is all revealed, through the contemporary modern day story. But we fast forward, and this is our bookshop now, with my very reluctant bookseller living in the garret up above, and the walls are crumbling because the building is so old. And she starts finding these artifacts, and her journey through her emotional journey is kind of reflected by the things that she finds and what she does with them and the way that she restores them.
So I'm curious, does the idea process that you just described, is that kind of similar for each novel, or is it unique to each novel that you write?
Well, don't we wish? I wish that I had the same process every time. One thing that I should tell the writers who are listening to this is, if you think like I do that every other writer except you has all the answers and they have the perfect method, probably you're wrong. I'm always convinced that every other writer has a better way of getting there than I do. And I'm endlessly curious. I want to know where their ideas come from and how they develop them, and what their workspace is and what their working day is like. And yet I never hear the same answer from the same author. And I would love to be like, I do have one writer friend who says she lays on the floor and she plays country western songs, like sad breakup songs, and comes up with book after book after book. And it's the same method every time. And I'm just fascinated by that. It would cut out a lot of wasted time for me if I knew where the next thing was coming from. But after 50 some books that I've written, I usually have to trust that it will come, but it might come out of nowhere when I'm waiting for a train, or, sitting on my patio, or pruning my garden or something.
Or listening to country music.
Yeah. And I did say some songs have inspired. I'm trying. Oh, yeah. One book was inspired by a song. I remember it. The book was called Just Breathe. It was a big reader favorite and a bestseller. And it was inspired by the song Breathe 2 a.m. by Anna Nalick.
Mm-hmm. I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, it was a huge hit a few years ago.
Yeah, it was. It's on my kind of major playlist on Spotify. But so I'm curious. I mean, obviously the pandemic has changed, at least for me. I'm a huge bookstore person, and that's one of the things I'm really looking forward to, getting back into a bookstore. I'm curious. Yeah. So let's just answer this question pre-pandemic. What role do bookstores and bookshops play in your own life?
I was like you. My bookstore was more than just a retailer that you pop into. It was a place where I would go to connect with people who love books, who want to share. I love walking into a bookstore and somebody like practically hits me over the head with a book. Oh my God, you got to read this. And so things like that just inspire me. And so I love bookstores for that reason. Library is just this welcome mat that's been a part of my life. It belongs to my earliest memories. So they're really huge for me. And I don't think I've ever met a writer who dismissed how important bookstores are. And I always give my main character a job that I would love to have, which is why they're painters and photographers and world travelers. And, they have this kind of glorious lifestyle. And I always did want to be a bookseller, but I knew that I wasn't cut out for it because I'm simply just not that organized. And you do need a pretty keen sense, business sense in order to do that. And so this is the Lost and Found Bookshop is my fantasy bookstore. And I did connect with real working booksellers as I was researching this book. And they're going to laugh when they see it because I'd talked to them for 3 hours just to get like one little nugget of information from them. And of course had to oversimplify certain things because the minutia is not interesting to read about. But I hope that based on the feedback from the early bookseller readers of the book, I think I hope that I was able to make that come alive for readers in a really dramatic way.
Great. And what are your earliest memories of reading and books?
I can tell you the very first book that I remember being read to me was it was called The Watchbirds, and it was by the guy who wrote Ferdinand the Bull, and I can't remember the guy. Oh, Quentin something, not Quentin
Sure.
Tarantino.
No.
Anyway,
That would be a little bit different.
yeah, no, my dad would read that to us, and we would laugh and howl. There were three of us, all stair step kids. I was in the middle, and I remember I was probably 3 years old, and then by the age of 4, I was an early reader, and I read a book called The Carrot Seed by Ruth Krauss. And it's still in print, I'm sure. It's, 60 whatever years old by now. And I remember being so proud that I could read that book. I wanted to show everybody this book that I could read. So I have that. And then I remember the very first book that I bought with my own money was called Yertle the Turtle by Dr. Seuss. And I didn't even know that it was subversive literature when I was reading it, but apparently it is.
So I'm curious, what was the path to...
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I had one of libraries that's sort of in your neck of the woods. It was in upstate New York, and it was one of those kind of neo-Gothic, big blocky granite libraries with the pillars and the marble stairs and the big atrium inside. And I was almost afraid of the bathroom. It was so scary. I just remember that bit and being so proud to have my library card. And oh gosh, it was such a home away from home for me.
That's great. So I'm curious, what was the path to publication for you, to writing and publishing your first novel? Had you always wanted to be a writer?
Always. I always, from before I could even read or write, I would scribble on paper and tell my mother, now write this down. I would say, now write this down. And she would do it, and she actually saved some samples from when I was, 3 and 4 and 5 years old of books that I self-published. So it was always something that I was drawn to and called to do. And I went through college and graduate school knowing I wanted to be a writer, but knowing that nobody pays you to aspire to write. So I knew that I needed a job. I thought teaching would suit me. I loved it. I was good at it. I got a master's in it. And I thought that I would write in the evenings and the school holidays. And so it seemed like that would suit my lifestyle. That would support my writing. And indeed, that's what I did. I wrote my first book on a typewriter. Well, I write everything in longhand first, and then I type it up. And that didn't sell. And I wrote my second book on a typewriter. By the third book, I kind of got the hang of it. And it was in the 80s. There was no internet. There was no, the resources for writers were so different before the internet. It was Writer's Digest, and there was some annual journal that you could only get from the libraries. I think it was called the Literary. Now I can't even remember the name of it, but it was
Literary Marketplace, I think.
Yes, that was it. LMP. Oh, good memory. Yeah, there was that, but I still didn't really get what the process was like. I kind of pictured, and this is a true story. I pictured the publisher as being wherever the P.O. box was in the back of the book. You'd read a paperback book and it would say, "Did you like this book? Would you like more? Send a coupon to Avon Books." And it was at a P.O. box in Ohio or something. And I thought, well, that's where I should send my manuscript. And so I did. I sent my manuscript to this P.O. box in Ohio, and most of them disappeared. But one time it came back in those big pouch envelopes, and with a scribbled note that said, "This is the fulfillment warehouse. You want editorial in New York," and they gave me an address. And so, being the genius that I was, I addressed my next manuscript to my next mailing to editorial, New York, New York. And I collected a number of rejects that way. However, eventually, I believe there was a piece in Writer's Digest that I noticed that mentioned genre editors, because an editor works usually with one type of book, or, with discrete types: cookbooks, nonfiction, commercial fiction, mystery, that sort of thing. And so I was writing historical romances at the time, and I found an editor whose name was associated with historical romance. And so I sent it directly to her. And she got back to me within, days, and made me an offer on that book. And I remember it was the end of August, and she said, "But we need to get it into production the day after Labor Day. So can you revise it?" And so I revised a typewritten 600-page book in a long weekend. I was very motivated. And I was also like 26 years old. So that helped. It helped me young and hungry and motivated. So, yeah, that was my first sale. And I should say for your listeners, I don't recommend selling directly to a publisher without a literary agent. The reason I did that is there's a bit of a catch-22, because agents aren't really interested in working with writers who are unproven with zero track record. And I had zero track record, so the agents didn't want to talk to me. And the publishers didn't want any submissions that were unagented. And so it's a bit of a catch-22, but you can sometimes, through a query letter or a personal connection or something like that, get an editor to look at it. And I did. I made myself a really, really poor deal on that very first book. I just didn't know my way around publishing contracts. I did join the Authors Guild, which I recommend everybody to do the minute they're a published author, because that's our advocacy group. So they helped me with that contract, but even they said, look, you really want a literary agent. So after I had a publisher ready, to publish my book, then it was not a problem to interview agents and find someone to represent me. So I sort of did it backwards. I got the first sale under my belt and then hired a literary agent. And after that, only ever worked with an agent who would never, ever charge any sort of fee. I do know that there are some kind of predatory agencies that like to charge writers for processing fees or reading fees or submission fees or something like that. Definitely not a fan of that. An agent makes their money off of a commission off of your selling your book, 10 to 15%, depending on your deal with the agent.
So I'm curious if you can remember, you mentioned that it was like your third novel that you finally got published, the third novel that you had written. Do you remember, were there specific writing challenges in those first manuscripts that you had to either overcome or figure out, whether it's characterization, plotting, dialogue?
Yes, I kind of hit pay dirt with a book that is a bit hard to find, but it's a really amazing, helpful book called Techniques of the Selling Writer by Dwight Swain. And it's a small press. It might be like University of Oklahoma or something like that. And it's just a really clear roadmap on how to put together a work of commercial fiction. So that was my roadmap. And also, simply the act of sitting down and writing a book from start to finish, there is no better training program than that. To really put something together, it's like building a house from the ground up. And so after doing that for 2 complete books, neither of which sold because they also lacked something that I was very unaware of, which is commercial elements. They need a really appealing setting and a storyline that readers can instantly relate to. And those first books, they were very political. They were set in obscure historical cities around obscure historical events that interested me, like the Spanish-American War, but would not really hook a reader because the relatability wasn't there. And what I did, I found myself reading this sexy Western historical romance and just really getting into it. And I thought, well, people like Texas, they like cowboys. And so my third book, I thought I can write a story with these elements. And so it was a combination of my writing skills improving and me being more aware of what flies with readers.
So, given your success and hitting the New York Times, the #1 New York Times list, what writing advice would you offer for listeners who are writing their own stories and novels and would like to get them published?
I think that, first of all, you have to have this fire in the belly, because I've done a lot of teaching of writing. I've done workshops and retreats and things like that. And I've worked with literally hundreds of writers over the 30 years that I've been a published author. And in those 30 years, I think there are 4 people that I worked with who actually became published authors in their own right. And so it's, and the reason isn't that they weren't talented. It isn't that they didn't have good ideas, because they did. They had talent, they had good ideas, but what they didn't have was this stick-to-itiveness, this, raw determination. I'm going to get my story done, and I'm going to send it out and find the right publisher for this book. And that sounds really simple as we talk about it, and I'm oversimplifying as I'm telling my story, but it takes a great deal of nobody's encouraging you. Nobody's funding you. The mountain is out. You want to go paddleboarding. You want to play with your kid. You want to take your dog for a walk. Your mother needs something. There's a million reasons to not write. And you have to have that fire in the belly that, nope, I'm going to sit here and get this story out because it is burning a hole in me. And I feel that way about every book I write, even the difficult parts, because it would be nice if I would sit down and just, kind of take dictation from God and get my novel flowing. But, some days it's like passing a kidney stone. It's just painful and it won't come. And so, there are good days and bad, but even a bad day of writing, I'm still doing what I want and what I've always dreamed of doing. And so for emerging writers, make it important to you, to your family, make it a priority. If it's a priority, you'll do it. You'll say, no, thanks. I can't go golfing today. I'm going to write. No, thanks. I can't watch this movie. I can't binge this series. And sometimes the choices aren't a lot of fun, and I acknowledge that I've gotten lazier as I've gone along, but I think I've earned my laziness. There was a time when I was writing 2 books a year, 2 long books a year, and I was just, filled with the energy to write. And now one of the bonuses of being long published and having successful publications is that I get to slow myself down a little bit.
So, as you mentioned, you've been writing for 30 years. What keeps you excited now and going back to the novels and going back to the writing each day?
I guess it's because every book and every idea feels fresh to me in terms of the people that I'm going to populate the book with, the setting of the book, the drama of the book. I never tire of that. It's sort of like going to, well, if you're social and you're not an introvert, going to a new party every few days and meeting a whole new cast of characters. And so I never tire of that process. And people ask me, they say, well, what are your retirement plans? Like my financial planner, what are your retirement plans? And I think, well, I don't think, I can't see myself ever retiring from writing. I could maybe see myself trying something way out of my writing box. My writing box is commercial fiction, and maybe I would try something like a screenplay or a murder mystery, or, something that I'm not known for, but I've always, admired and wanted to try my hand at. But that's down the road, because right now, one of the great bonuses of having a really good publisher behind your book is that They bring new readers to you. Every single book, you think, oh my gosh, that book sold really well. I've got all the readers I need. No, I'm greedy for more. And so I get my energy from getting the story to the reader. Like the day that this book will be published is such a cool day because it's not my book anymore. I wrote it, but then it goes out in the world. It's sort of like sending your kid off to kindergarten or something. It's not yours anymore. It's got a life of its own in the hands of a reader. Because I've always believed that everybody reads a different book. We can all read the same book, but we all bring our own creative experiences to it. And so everybody reads a different book. And I'm hopeful that the Lost and Found Bookshop will have enough stories in it and enough different tropes that people will relate to it on a number of levels.
Great. Well, what novels or nonfiction books have you read recently that you enjoyed?
I'm in the middle of reading a really, really hard to read, but incredibly well-written literary novel called Homegoing by, I hope I'm going to say her name right, Ya Gyasi. Because one of the other things that's been happening in our world here, besides the pandemic, is that we're having racial protests and justifiable anger with police brutality. And so I made a commitment that I would shop at bookshops owned by people of color and take their recommendations. And this was recommended by a Black-owned bookshop. I got it online. I talked to them online. And so I kind of have a stack of reading outside my culture. And so that's going to be probably most of my summer reading. So that one. And for nonfiction, my very good friend, a guy that I just admire so much, Eric Larson, wrote The Splendid and the Vile. And it's a story of Churchill and World War II. And so that one it's on my nightstand, but it's going to have to make a Father's Day gift for my husband. He's not my father, but he needs something on Father's Day because he is a dad. So sure. I'll probably have to hand it over to him. And then the other one that I'm reading, because I'm the caregiver for my mom, who's 89, it's called Advice to Future Corpses and Those Who Love Them, which is a kind of crazy title.
Yeah. Quite a title.
Advice to Future Corpses by Sally Tisdale, I believe. And it's very loving and practical and philosophical thoughts about the elderly and what their needs are and what the needs of the people caring for them are. And I've really benefited from that. So I'm all over the map with my reading.
So where can people find you online if they'd like to learn more about you and your novels?
Oh, thank you for asking. I always forget to promote my website, SusanWiggs.com, Wiggs with 2 G's. And that is the central, direction to go, because all of my events this summer are going to be virtual events, which is kind of a blessing and a curse. The blessing is that anybody from anywhere in the world literally can log on and participate in an event, a bookstore event. And most of them seem to be on a platform where the author is chatting remotely with the bookseller, and we have like a book chat and Q&A with readers and that sort of thing. And then they can order a autographed book. So I've got several of those lined up. And starting July 7th, it will be available everywhere, including the mass market. I don't want to steer people away from Target and Walmart and Costco and Sam's and all the book outlets that they frequent, because those are booksellers too, and they did stay open during the pandemic. So I can't dismiss that. But one of the things that happened was indie bookstores really organized themselves to try to stay afloat during all the shutdowns. So I think they were pretty successful. I hope so. I hope they stay open. And so I'm encouraging readers of the Lost and Found Bookshop to please, if they have an independent bookshop in their town or one that they know of, order online, order curbside delivery, somehow manage to patronize these mom and pop community centers, because I just think that they're so valuable.
That's a great message, and I completely agree.
Yes, and I agree with your website has a link to, is it Libro FM?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that one. You can even, I believe you can designate the bookshop that you want to benefit with your purchase of an audiobook from Libro FM, which I love.
You can. So great. Well, again, we've been speaking with New York Times bestselling writer Susan Wiggs. Her new novel, The Lost and Found Bookshop, is in bookstores now. So go buy a copy. And Susan, thanks for doing this interview.
Jeff, thank you so much. This was such a pleasure. What a great way to start my day.
Great. If you're new to audiobooks, they're the perfect way to get more books into your busy life. Listen to audiobooks during your commute, while doing chores, walking the dog, or just relaxing at home. All you need is a smartphone and the free Libro.fm app. If you already love audiobooks and don't know what to listen to next, check out recommendations and curated lists from people who know audiobooks best, your local bookseller. Reading and Writing Podcast special offer: get 2 audiobooks for the price of 1 with your first month of membership with code RWPodcast. That's code RWPodcast for 2 audiobooks for the price of 1 for your first month of membership at Libro.fm.
Not since flying reindeer have the holidays seen something so amazing. Just in time to make selfie-ready holiday hair easy. Introducing the do-it-all styling tools for glam holiday hair. The holidays are happier with glam hair. And the Knot Doctor all-in-one dryer brushes from Conair makes it easy. Detangle, dry, and style in one step. No elf needed. The Knot Doctor collection has a dryer brush for every hair type and style. The pink smoothing paddle dryer brush has Flexolite bristles for painless detangling and high-performance power for quick styling and smooth, shiny results. And the purple dryer brush comes with a bonus volumizing attachment to boost lift and volume at the roots. It's perfect for salon blowouts at home. And since they're ideal for every hair type and length, they make great gifts for everyone on your list who wants beautiful hair without the hassles. Shop the Knot Doctor dryer brushes at Conair.com or at your favorite retailers now.